All right, we've talked about why economic globalization is a really great idea, but with the good must come the bad. And when it comes to economic globalization, the more capitalist it is, in other words, the less government control there is, the greater the chance that people and the environment are getting damaged. Because the World Bank, IMF, and WTO often encourage more right wing policies, that includes the promotion of deregulation, which is the reduction of rules that includes those rules that protect the environment. Aboriginal spiritual values often say that we're connected to the earth. Other spiritual beliefs, such as Buddhism, also want us to think about how we're interconnected with everything on the planet. When Europeans first arrived in Canada, they thought the land wasn't being used by Aboriginal peoples because it wasn't being cultivated and parceled out the way it was back in France or Britain. Yet the land was being used, just not controlled. Many First Nations groups would move from one area to another, allowing the area to regenerate. But the European view was to extract resources at a faster rate than nature could replenish, and then use the various means to artificially encourage regrowth. Farming. Nutrition is being lost in our food due to overfarming. Issues like the use of hormones in animals is throwing off children's hormonal balances. Bees are dying due to the use of herbicides, pesticides, and chemical fertilizers, not to mention the fact that bees, which are essential for most of our food chain, are shipped all over the country to help with the pollination because we don't have bee farms established closer to the sources where they're needed. Agribusiness, or large corporate agriculture, is also putting a strain on the environment, as increased consumption of food means the need for increased yields of crops, and major corporations are taking over that family farm. GMOs, or genetically modified foods, can be a real benefit to people because it can make food that grows faster and can survive transportation to faraway places. And that means more people have access to fresh food. But we still don't know the long-term effects of many of these GMO products. And because of the use of pesticides, herbicides, and resistant seeds is very expensive, small-scale farmers can't compete. Many farmers will turn to cash crops to make money, things like coffee, cotton, or sugar, which are all products that can't be used to feed a family. So if the price of those goods goes down, the family can literally starve on their own farm. And shipping our food from around the world does mean that we here in Canada can have fresh fruits and vegetables year-round, but the pollution created by all that shipping puts a tremendous strain on the environment. In fact, it's estimated that around 20% of all global carbon emissions comes from the transportation of goods to distant markets. Foreign investment can be a really great way to increase your economic growth, but the focus on making money can come at the expense of the environment. For example, in Africa, there's been many foreign companies who've come in and stripped the environment to get at the resources because there's limited rules. The government in that area wants the jobs and infrastructure that comes with foreign investment, so they make sure their laws will benefit that foreign company. We can see this in mining for coltan, which contains an essential component for cell phones and other electronics. Sadly, another negative to mining in Africa is that it's been proven to have financed wars and other atrocities on the continent. And trade liberalization has not really led to everyone in the world being able to participate in the global economy because it's not a level playing field. The world is not yet flat. Remember that discussion? Poor farmers in Africa can't compete with agricultural products produced in the West because they don't have access to the technology we have, or get support from the government when there's a crop failure due to a natural disaster. In addition, we often have regulations that make it more difficult for these goods to be imported, like requiring bilingual labeling and specific package requirements on our products. We also have many tariffs on our foreign goods, like our dairy products. For example, until recently, Canada had over 240% tariff on foreign cheese and a 300% tariff on butter from foreign countries in order to protect our domestic dairy producers. The Industrial Revolution led to that rapid production of goods, which made them cheaper, which in turn means that we can consume more, and that's a huge impact on the environment. Here's a simple example. Many of us order products online, which means now there's a greater demand for cardboard packaging, which comes from wood. And it's not just paper products that are putting higher demands on our forests. In the rainforest, there are acres of trees being cut down or even burned to increase grazing land for cattle ranchers to supply the increasing demand for hamburgers around the world, because as developing nations become more developed, fast food becomes significantly more popular. This means we're losing important carbon sinks or storage because the trees are a great way to take that carbon dioxide and turn it into oxygen. And that burned wood and methane emissions from the cows increases the greenhouse gases in the environment. Even here in Canada, we're losing more and more farmland to urban development. We all want our big backyard, so our urban footprint, which is our impact on the environment, is really big. For example, the city of Calgary has a huge urban footprint. In fact, it exceeded the Canadian average by 30%. If everyone on the planet wanted to live the same way, we'd need 5 planets. So in 2005, the city made a plan to reduce their footprint by doing things like encouraging more dense development, like high rise apartments. And the more developed a country is, the larger their footprint on the environment, because we use so many resources and dispose of them without a second thought. For example, did you know Canada has the not so great reputation for being one of the worst countries in the world for wasting clean water? And we know our oceans are feeling the impact of our greater global consumption. Air pollution is increasing greenhouse gases, which contributes to global warming. And while the causes and responses to global warming are a controversial issue, the fact is the planet is warming and oceans are being impacted. Coral is dying, fish stocks are being depleted, and sea levels are increasing, causing damage to small islands in places like the Pacific. Here in Canada, the cod stocks were severely depleted due to overconsumption, and despite our efforts to try and revive the cod stocks, it's been very difficult because international law allows people to catch cod 200 miles off our border, and the cod don't know they're protected within that 200-mile radius. Have you heard about the huge pile of garbage floating in the Pacific Ocean caused by all of the plastic being thrown into our waterways? While governments have all kinds of international trade agreements, as of 2016, there was not an international agreement or effort to clean up this mess that's the size of Alberta. Think about those spiritual values that say we're all interconnected to each other and the environment. Considering these views, how can something like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch show how we're hurting ourselves because we've lost our connection and understanding of our values? Many of the overseas factories don't have the same regulations we have here in Canada, so pollution is a serious issue. During our Industrial Revolution, we also had massive pollution problems, and over time, people demanded that the government do something about it. In Beijing today, the pollution is a very serious problem, and people are starting to demand changes be made, but this is going to have to be done at the expense of economic growth. Remember that idea of sustainable development. When your economic growth is causing massive pollution, that's not sustainable. Several years ago, the Kyoto Protocol was signed by most nations in the world and was hailed as a way to reduce greenhouse gases. But major developed nations like the US refused to sign because it would impact their economy. And Canada, under the Conservative government, withdrew their support because it would take a major toll on our fossil fuel industries. When the deadline arrived in 2012 for countries to have met their targets, it was seen by most people to be a failure. Many beautiful places in the world are realizing that money can be made with tourism, and I admit I am one of those people that loves to travel around the world to these places. And while some of the money can be used to protect the environment, often it puts serious strain on the environment. So many people want to come and visit the major tourist centers, but that creates more garbage and strain on the water supplies, and all that traffic to see those beautiful areas impacts the flora and fauna. That's the plants and animals. Remember that discussion of Vanuatu in a previous video and how tourism has impacted their culture? This is why economic globalization is such a controversial topic. While there's many benefits that have come with encouraging greater international trade, there are also serious downsides.